Welcome to Cape Cod Real Estate Corner. As you know, real estate is a major engine of economic prosperity on the Cape. In addition to buyers, sellers, and real estate agents, it directly involves thousands of workers and millions of dollars of economic activity. Even if it doesn't touch you at this moment, it touches many people you know, your friends, your neighbors, and people you do business with. This series of presentations will help give you a better understanding of this important business and may help you be a smarter seller or buyer if you are currently participating in the real estate market or will be entering the market in the future. Our guest is Mrs. Debbie Martin of the Mid-Cape Real Estate School in West Dennis. Debbie has been involved in real estate for 30 years on the Cape. She is a licensed broker and a past president of the Cape Cod and Islands Association of Realtors. She is co-owner with her husband, Dick Martin, and Christopher Green of ERA Cape Real Estate with offices in Dennis and Yarmouth. She is licensed by the state of Massachusetts to teach the pre-licensing course for people taking the real estate licensing written exam. She also teaches advanced courses for real estate agents to meet required continuing education goals. More importantly, Debbie Martin teaches her customers what they need to know to be smart buyers and smart sellers. Today, she's going to talk about Title V, also known as the Septic System Law. Welcome to Cape Cod Real Estate Corner, Mrs. Martin.
Well, thanks for having me, Bob. Title V is, believe it or not, an exciting subject. It affects so many people.
Yeah, so tell us then, why is it important that both buyers and sellers be familiar with the septic system law?
Well, we should probably start with the law itself, and the law is pretty specific. It says that any property that is transferred in the state of Massachusetts, with some exceptions, must have a Title V inspection. So they must be inspected by a licensed Title V inspector that's licensed by the state of Massachusetts, not the local Board of Health, but an actual a Title V inspector. And that person draws up a report. It's about a 30-page report, and it tells all the details of your septic system. And that report will, on the front page of the report, it will say that the report indicates a passed system, a failed system, or a system that needs further evaluation. The reason that it's critical that the Title V inspection take place as soon as possible when you're going to put your house on the market is most buyers ask. Buyers today are savvy and they know some of the issues that are most relevant here on the Cape. And many buyers, when we drive up in front of our house, will say, what's the status of the septic on this house? They want to know, because here on Cape Cod, we basically have all private septic systems. There are some town sewer systems in Hyannis. I know now the town of Chatham has a town sewer system, and I know that Yarmouth is looking at it, but it's not widespread. It is mainly private septic systems here on the Cape. And so buyers want to know what the status of the septic is. As a realtor, and as a seller, you won't have that answer until you have it inspected. The law says that it must be inspected and a report be written within a 2-year period of time of the closing. So if I had my Title V inspected today, it would be good until January of 2018. And during that time, I could sell my house. And I would have met the Title V requirements if I had a past report. So the reason it's so critical that you have that inspection done if you're a seller when you list the property, preferably just before you list the property. So as a realtor, we have that answer when buyers ask us what the status is. And the reason it's important is if it passes, you're good. You're good for 2 years. But if it should fail, you have a lot of other work ahead of you. And you also need to know how much money it's going to cost you to sell that house. Because believe it or not, buyers feel that the toilet should flush. They don't think that the house is worth more money just because the toilet flushes. So if you have a failed Title V and you need to install a new one, if you're the seller, the first thing that you should want to know is, what is it going to cost to put a new Title V in my property? And how do you find that out? Well, once you have a failed report, you contact an engineer. And an engineer will come out to the property and he'll do a perk test and he'll do some other tests. He'll go back to his office. He'll draw up a plan for a new Title V to go into the property. Once that plan is done and submitted to the town Board of Health agent, whatever town you live in, then you can get bids for that plan. You can go to septic installers and say, what would you charge to do this plan? And they'll tell you, and they'll put it in writing. So then you can have 2 or 3 bids in your hand. Once you have that, you can sell your house even with a failed Title V.
Wow. So it doesn't have to pass the test before the septic system is fixed. So who would bear the cost then of the new septic system? The seller, the buyer? And
well,
could you give us an idea of how much money we're talking about? Not an exact figure, but a range.
All right.
Please be seated, audience, when you hear this.
Septic systems can be expensive. Typically, probably 80% of the septic systems that my company has been involved with, as far as having a listing and having the septic fail, it's anywhere between $7,000 and $10,000 or $11,000. That's the most common number that we see. I've seen septic systems cost $25,000 or even $40,000. And those septic systems are expensive because when the engineer goes out to the property and he takes his perk test and he does his measurements, there's a high water table. And if you have a high water table, that means that the septic system has to be built up. And sometimes it has to be built up to a point, and you've probably seen them when you've gone past areas, especially areas that are very near the beach. You'll see a mound in the front yard, and that's the septic system. And those mounded systems, and sometimes walled systems, can be very expensive. But your typical septic is anywhere between $7,000 and $10,000 or $11,000. You can indeed sell a septic system when it's failed, as long as you have a plan and a quote, because a buyer who's buying a house, who's getting a mortgage, the bank will demand that they have a plan for that brand new system before they'll give a mortgage on that property. So once you have a plan and you have a bid, a bank will do an okay for a mortgage, and then the property can be sold. And that's the reason it's so important to have that done ahead of time.
So the property would be sold at a discount over what it would cost the new owner to fix the septic system, or does the new owner just accept the bid, the asking price, and then pay it themselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good question, because it can go either way. Either the buyer and seller will decide that the buyer will accept that cost, or the buyer and seller will decide that the seller will accept that cost. Typically, the seller accepts the cost, because as I started out saying, buyers don't think a house is worth more money just because the toilet flushes. So typically, a buyer will expect a seller to shoulder that expense. And how that happens is that either the seller can just simply have it done ahead of time before the closing. They can go ahead and put a new septic in. Or if they can't afford to do that, they can wait until the closing. And at the closing table, the buyer's closing attorney will hold back a certain amount of money at the closing table to cover the cost and any added contingencies of the new installation, hold it out of the seller's proceeds, and keep it in an escrow account. Right after closing, the installer will come along, install the new Title V. The closing attorney will pay him with those proceeds, and the buyers end up in their property with a brand new septic system.
And this is one of the things that a realtor would help
Absolutely.
Both the seller and the buyer
Absolutely.
with to make sure that all of this is accomplished
Yep.
prior to closing?
They will. They'll help you from the get-go. We have a list of septic inspectors that we'll give to you so that you can get your septic inspected at the same time of putting your property on the market. We'll walk you through the steps if should it fail or should it need further evaluation. We have the names of engineers and installers, and we'll meet with them, we'll go to the house with them, whatever it is you need, we're more than happy to provide that service because it's in our best interest as well. We're now selling a product that we know a lot more about, that we feel a lot more confident about, and we can help you maintain control financially of that project. So we're more than happy to do that.
So this is one of the major considerations in a real estate transaction, and
Yes.
It could be fraught with difficulties if you were trying to navigate this on your own.
It is, and it isn't something you want to do last minute. I've been involved in sales when it's been my buyer and another company's seller, and that seller wasn't given good advice. They weren't told to get that inspection done early enough. So once they got an offer, and my offer said that the seller would take care of the Title V should there be any problem with it, now the seller's between a rock and a hard place. Because now he's already accepted an offer that says that regardless of what the inspection shows, he's got to provide a new Title V certificate. So should it fail, he's got to put a new one in. And that really puts him behind the 8 ball. It's good from my buyer, but it's not so good for that seller. And at that point, the seller sort of loses control of the expense for that project. And also, he's now under a clock. There's a clock running because we have a closing date. So he's not in the best light, and that's unfortunate for that seller.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Martin.